Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited for today's tier list video where we look at all 30 NBA teams. I'm going to rank them in a variety of different categories. We have our conference favorites right at the top, true title contenders, teams that I could see really making a push to winning the NBA Finals this upcoming season. We'll also look at some title hopefuls, teams that are maybe second round exits, for example, in there, teams that are in the playoff mix, so those are maybe your first round playoff exits. In this video, we're also going to talk about the teams in the play-in mix. So are you a 9-10 seed, maybe even some 8-7 seeds included in there. We'll see how this video goes. Then we have the flat out bad teams, and we already have the teams that are focused on the 2025 NBA draft, specifically in hopes of landing Cooper Flagg first overall out of Duke, maybe Ace Bailey, he'll be in the second overall pick conversation, as well as Nolan Traore, a few other notable draft prospects this year. Dylan Harper, another name I want to mention. But hopefully you guys do enjoy today's content. If you do, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more. And let's jump forward now and really get into this tier maker list and take a real look at what are some potential options for some of these teams. Where do I expect them to land? I think the easiest way for me to start here is with the Boston Celtics, the reigning NBA champs. Now, where am I going to put them? That's a great question. I'm going to slap them right there. Conference favorites. I think that is more than warranted. Not only were they tremendous last season, winning 64 games in the regular season, but then they cruised through the playoffs as well. Now, I know there's going to be some skeptics, some critics, some haters saying, oh, well, they had an easy run to the finals. First of all, that doesn't even exist. There's no such thing as an easy run to the finals. Because you have to beat a whole bunch of teams. Yes, I know Miami was hurt. Yes, I know Indiana was hurt. I know Cleveland was missing some guys. I understand that, but they dominated all season long. They also played most of the playoffs without their own starting center, who is an absolute cheat code in their own half-court offense with the spacing that they play with and the pace that they play. The Boston Celtics are just a tremendous team offensively, and something that doesn't get talked about enough. Defensively, they are a complete unit. They can guard 1 through 5. All 5 players that they have on the floor are capable defenders. Even when they have someone like Sam Hauser in the game, teams typically try and pick on him, go at him. He's not a bad individual defender. He actually holds his own very, very well. I think the Celtics, top to bottom, are such a very strong, well-built team. Brad Stevens deserves a ton of credit. The Boston Celtics should be right at the top of the list as a conference favorite for the Eastern Conference. Now, you might be saying, well, what about the West? And there's a bunch of teams we could talk about here. We could talk about the Denver Nuggets. We could look at the Dallas Mavericks, who just won the West this past season. We could look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, who were tremendous all year long last year and really had a chance to push to the first ever NBA Finals berth in franchise history. They came up just short against the Dallas Mavericks, a lot of close competitive games, but Luka Doncic outdueled them in that series by quite a large margin in those clutch moments. But you might say, okay, well, if it's none of those 3 teams, who is it? And I think it should be very apparent right now that the Oklahoma City Thunder are the favorites in the Western Conference as currently constructed, how the conference currently sits and stands. The Thunder should be the favorite. Now, we still have a trade deadline ahead of us here and probably some roster movement, some player movement that could shake this up a little bit, especially in the West, where I think Boston has a pretty big lead in the East. I think OKC is kind of bunched with some of those other teams in the West, but I still think with the addition of Isaiah Hartenstein, that gives them a player who can match up really well into some of those pivotal matchups. You think about trying to guard the Denver Nuggets. You want to have a big, physical, strong body to throw on Nikola Jokic. That's what Hartenstein will do. And then you can have Chet Holmgren as a roamer, helping off of Aaron Gordon, occupying the dunker spot space, playing as a really consistent and active help side guy. In that role, Chet Holmgren will provide a huge advantage for the Oklahoma City Thunder against the Denver Nuggets. Against Minnesota, that also helps them as well with the added size, probably placing Chet Holmgren on Karl Anthony Towns, using Isaiah Hartenstein on Rudy Gobert. And then against Dallas as well with their a little bit more athletic but still semi-big lineup with PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively on the floor. OKC just has better matchups into those options now. So for that reason, I do like where Oklahoma City is currently at with their roster from a front court perspective. And then obviously the backcourt, they just have so many different options defensively. Lou Dort, one of the best on-ball defenders in the entire league. Alex Caruso, one of the most active defenders both on and off the ball. He's got very quick feet, active hands, but he also does a good job occupying gaps in space when he's off the ball. I'm a big believer in what he provides and what he will do for the Oklahoma City Thunder this upcoming season. I think it's going to be a really tremendous option and piece for them for sure. And I think that just with an MVP caliber player in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I think another step forward from both Chet Holmgren, hopefully offensively, and Jalen Williams, the Thunder are right there as not only a title hopeful, but a true favorite in the Western Conference. Obviously, a 2-week stretch of PJ Washington shooting the best of his career could really flip things again. But based on how OKC is built, I am a big believer in their roster, and I think they are going to be the team that wins the most games in the Western Conference this year, and I could see them really coming out of the West as soon as this season. Now, it's not to diminish the other teams. We've already talked about Dallas, I think a true title contender. We talked about Minnesota. We talked about Denver. Those 3 teams, I think, are all true title contenders in the Western Conference, and all for very different reasons. Minnesota, their team is really built on the construct of their defense. Now, they did sacrifice that a little bit, losing Kyle Anderson to free agency, drafting Rob Dillingham, a very small, slight guard that is going to hurt them a little bit defensively, but they needed some of that offensive punch as well. I think Dillingham's going to help quite a bit as an off-the-bench scoring guard who can also play make and facilitate their offense a bit when Mike Conley is out of the game. Obviously, you can expect an Anthony Edwards growth. Once again, he has continued to get better and better and better in basically all of the cerebral parts of basketball year after year. Luka Doncic for the Mavericks, that is really where the conversation starts and stops. He is arguably the best player in the entire world right now, him and Nikola Jokic both, which is why Denver's also on this list. Those are probably the 2 best players in the universe currently as I record this video. Luka, Jokic, very different with how they do it. Obviously, Jokic works out of the middle of the floor so much, kind of in that mid-post area as a facilitator, and then Luka so much off of a live handle. They're just so special, and both of them are so dominant that when you have them both on the floor, the court mapping of Nikola Jokic, the offensive generation from Luka Doncic out of driving kicks and lobs, obviously that was something that killed the Minnesota Timberwolves in the Western Conference Finals. These 3 teams are true all-title contenders. I think Minnesota got a little bit better this past offseason. I really do. I think Dallas has improved adding Klay Thompson. I think it just adds an extra layer to their offense that they did not have a year ago with Derrick Jones Jr. I know people are going to freak out about the defense. I think it's a very well-built team defensive construct that will have some difficulties because teams have more film on it now. Going into this next year, they'll have a better idea of how to beat it after watching Boston do so in the NBA Finals. But the Mavericks, against certain personnel, are just going to be able to suffocate teams with the way that they guard, the way that they shrink the floor, and protect the rim, most prominently with Derek Lively being the primary reason for that. And then Denver, obviously, they've been there, they've done that. You have to give them that respect. They did lose KCP, which is why they're not, in my opinion, right now the conference favorite. But I think that they are still a very, very great team. I think KCP is a good player. I don't think it absolutely screws them losing to him either, though. So that's why they're still in my true title contenders tier. And how about in the Eastern Conference when we look at some of the true title contenders? We've got the New York Knicks. I think that they're very much in that mix. Last year they made a real deep push. A team that I think is really, really close to being the favorite. Now, I don't know if they're going to make enough threes to keep up with Boston, which is why I still have the Celtics as the conference favorites. But the Knicks will kill Boston on the offensive glass if they get into a series with them. And they have the personnel to try and limit Boston a bit from their perimeter-oriented attack. You think about Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby, 2 of the best wing defenders in the entire NBA, in my opinion. They do it very differently. OG Anunoby, very functionally strong, athletically gifted, and obviously really great anticipation. Mikal Bridges is more of a technique defender where he's using his footwork, he's using his screen navigation. Those are things that OG Anunoby, by the way, is also very good at, but I think Mikal Bridges is a different level of great in some of those technical areas, whereas OG Anunoby has a little bit more of a physical advantage from a strength and athletic component over Mikal Bridges, which gives, again, Tom Thibodeau a lot of optionality on how he wants to guard certain matchups. Remember last playoffs, they were playing without Julius Randle, playing without Mitchell Robinson for quite a bit. Now they did lose Isaiah Hartenstein. That's another thing that does hurt them quite a bit going into the postseason, going into this upcoming regular season. But I think the Knicks are a true title contender despite losing, one of their best players. And then this is where we get into the title hopefuls. And I'm going to put Indiana in here. I'm also going to put Philadelphia in this area. If I can find the Sixers logo, there it is. The Philadelphia 76ers. And I'm going to throw the Milwaukee Bucks in here. And now this is going to ruffle some feathers, right? Because I'm sure Bucks fans, you're probably expecting to be in that true title contenders. Sixers fans, after adding Paul George, I'm sure you were as well. And hey, Pacers fans, you guys just made the Eastern Conference Finals last year. If you go back to my videos a year ago, you can remember how high I was on this team, specifically Tyrese Halliburton, who was unbelievable last year, especially pre-hamstring injury. I think he was averaging 23 points and 12 assists per game. Prior to that hamstring injury, obviously his efficiency and production de-escalated quite a bit after that injury, which is very fair to expect. That's exactly what happened to James Harden when he hurt his hamstring playing for the Brooklyn Nets a few years ago in the NBA playoffs. Now, Harden was quite a bit older, hasn't really recovered post that injury. I think Halliburton will recover just fine. The question for me, even with Pascal Siakam and Miles Turner, who's really their big cheat code offensively, it's hard to defend Indiana, not only because of the pace that they play with and how good of a point guard Halliburton is. They've got a lot of spacing. They've got a lot of guys who can play off the catch. And really, anytime that they want to against pretty much any team in the league, they can go to their 1-5 pick and pop game between Halliburton and Miles Turner and generate an open look. Now, it doesn't mean it's always going to lead to points, but they can generate such easy, good offense through their ball movement, through their actions, and through their motion on the offensive end of the floor because of the pace, because of the talent level and the skill sets. Indiana is definitely in that title hopefuls category, and a team that, listen, if they're facing Boston and Boston has a couple of injuries, maybe Tatum tweaks his ankle or something, that gives Indiana a real chance. They pushed Boston decently well in the Eastern Conference Finals. Now, obviously, it turned into a sweep, but I think Indiana, with how close some of those games were, really had a shot at maybe upsetting Boston if things all went perfectly. Now, it didn't, and that's why, again, they find themselves in the title hopefuls. I wouldn't pick them in a series, but if things go perfectly for them, they definitely could walk out of it. Philadelphia, I would say the same thing for. When you have a healthy Joel Embiid, you have arguably the best or second or third best player in the entire world. Last year, he was scoring more points than he was playing minutes. That's how ridiculous he was offensively. He is such a talented player. His little 15-foot shots are basically layups. I know people are going to sit and cry and complain about the free throws. Maybe teams should stop fouling him then. I know, yes, he does grift for fouls. He does look for them. But the reason he's able to get to the line so much is because his strength, his size, and his skill set oftentimes puts defenses in a spot where you have to foul him to stop him. He is a very, very talented player, and him alone puts Philadelphia into this category. I think Tyrese Maxey is due for another big step forward, which I'm very excited to see. Now, the Paul George thing, you would think, yes, adding a max-level player makes them better. I do have some concerns about how Philadelphia is going to basically function offensively. You know, Chet Holmgren the other day on the Paul George podcast asked Paul George who gets the last shot of the game, and it should be very obviously Joel Embiid, who is the best player on the team. And Paul George is like, I'm going to leave that one up to Nick Nurse. So he's, you know, and it's not like a red flag, but that's a little bit of a yellow flag for me of, okay, does Paul George really think he might be the best or even the second best? He's not the second best player in Philadelphia. He is the third best player, just like he was in LA behind Kawhi Leonard and James Harden. Paul George is the third best player on Philadelphia. There is no conversation that he should be getting the last shot of the game very consistently, to be honest. Unless it's like a breakdown defensively and he gets an open catch and shoot shot, he should not be isolating for the win. It should be either Maxey or Embiid, and definitely should just flat out be Embiid. Milwaukee doesn't have that issue. Milwaukee's two-man game, I think, is going to take a step forward this year. You obviously saw some of the learning curve between Damian Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo in year one of their partnership. It also doesn't help when you had a first-time head coach and then you fire him after a pretty good start to the season, and then you hire Doc Rivers. That definitely did not help things. They went from the best offense and a terrible defense to a pretty mediocre offense and a pretty mediocre defense, which honestly I don't think is any better. Adrian Griffin, the one thing about him, he at least had the offense working extremely well there in Milwaukee. Doc Rivers came in and all of a sudden the offense stopped working despite doing a lot of the same things Adrian Griffin was having them do. He made some tweaks and those tweaks didn't work, including pulling Malik Beasley out of the starting lineup, inserting Patrick Beverley. Beverley's now no longer in the NBA. It's a questionable decision, in my opinion. I understand he was trying to improve the defense. It didn't really work, okay? The defense didn't get that much better, and the offense plummeted quite a bit. So I think, honestly, just with that reality, like, he made kind of a mistake, if we're being completely honest. So the Bucks, to me, it just feels, I like their additions. I really like Gary Trent Jr. I really loved that get for them. I like the signing of DeLon Wright. I like getting Taurean Prince. The Bucks are better this year than they were last year, but last year they were a first-round exit. I know people are going to say, oh, well, they were hurt. Guess what? They couldn't beat Indiana when they were healthy. And I still think, just like I talked about for the Pacers, that 1-5 pick and pop, when you have Brook Lopez playing in super deep drop coverage like he has to, you're not going to be able to defend Indiana. It's going to be hard to guard Philadelphia, and it's going to be nearly impossible to defend the Boston Celtics. So for that reason, I think Milwaukee's in a real struggle point here. They are title hopeful. It shows how strong the East is right now. I think the East is a very strong conference. People always tend to hate on the Eastern Conference. It's really strong right now. There are 5 teams that I could see being kind of inner circle title contender-ish teams if everything goes right for them. Now, ultimately, it's not going to go right for everybody. One team is going to be a first-round exit that I currently have on the tier list. That's just how things are. When we get to the Western Conference, there are some teams that still look at themselves as title hopefuls, but I just don't really view them in that regard. One of them, the Los Angeles Lakers, I think will be a playoff mixed team. The Houston Rockets will be a playoff mixed team. And this is where the strength of the West really is. We talked about the strength of the East around the top. Obviously, the West is very strong around the top too. But when it comes to playoff mix, I think there's a pretty big gap between some of the title contenders in the West and then actual teams that could talk themselves into maybe being title hopefuls. There's teams in here that I think are playoff mix caliber teams, specifically LA, Houston, I think are 2 very good examples of that. I think New Orleans is going to be in that mix as well this year. And then definitely Memphis. And this, it's not really a ranking right to left or left to right or anything, but Memphis is definitely the best team. In fact, I would consider putting Memphis in here, but I just do have a question about Jaren Jackson Jr. come playoff time. Is he going to be capable of playing and rising to that level to be, the second best player, arguably, on a title contending team? I'm not exactly certain about that currently. I did really like the Zach Edey pick. It seems like the Grizzlies are going to be a regular season win machine again. They're the best team here. They're probably going to be a top 5 seed in the West if I had to bet. I could even see them having a better regular season record than the Dallas Mavericks, even maybe over the Minnesota Timberwolves and maybe even the Denver Nuggets, honestly. Like, the Grizzlies might win 55 games, 52, 55 games. They're going to win a lot. But come playoff time, I think there are some flaws in the way that they're built. Zach Edey's going to predominantly play in deep drop coverage. Jaren Jackson Jr. offensively, is he consistent enough as a power forward, as a shooter to really stretch the floor enough? And if you're playing Jaren at the 5, can he rebound enough in those situations? I just don't know. Kind of tough for me. The Lakers, they're going to be a playoff team probably again. LeBron James is good enough to probably get them there. We saw in the Olympics how dominant he still is at this point in time. Anthony Davis is still a special player. Obviously, I think there are some shortcomings in his game as well, especially on the offensive end. His shot selection, the amount of long twos that he takes and then ultimately misses. It'll be interesting, though. First-year head coach J.J. Redick. One thing I do have to say, I think LeBron James is going to set a personal career record in amount of threes taken per game. As he ages, I think his game is going to become a little bit more perimeter-oriented, but now he's also getting a very analytics-based head coach who understands the value of the three-point shot and how much of an advantage it is. If there's a team in this tier that I could see, like, all of a sudden blowing people's expectations out of the water, it is the Los Angeles Lakers, because I do think for the first time with LeBron James there in LA, the team's going to shoot way more threes than we've been accustomed to seeing. Typically under Rob Pelinka teams, the Lakers have not shot a ton of threes per season. I think, especially compared to other teams around the league, I think with J.J. Redick coaching, it's going to look a little bit different. I think they're going to shoot way more threes, and I think as a result of that, their offense is going to climb quite a bit compared to where they were a year ago. Houston is just going to be a wins machine as well. Amen Thompson is going to take a big step forward in year 2. I'm expecting another big step forward for Jabari Smith. We'll see if we get Jalen Green 2.0. What we saw toward the end of the season, we'll see if we can get that for a whole sustained year. Alperen Şengün, I think, has really started to cement himself as a super high caliber, high quality player in this league, an ascending star for sure. Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, just like I said all last offseason, they were awesome additions to this team, really helped kind of shift the culture and change the focus from points per game to winning, and that's exactly what Houston needed there in the building. I just really like the direction of this team. Then we have, an addition at 3rd overall in Reed Shepherd, who's fantastic. And honestly, I think he's going to be right in the mix for Rookie of the Year, even though his minutes are going to be kind of low. I think he's going to be super impactful and super productive when he is on the floor. Then Steven Adams, I think another tremendous addition. They got him at the trade deadline last year from Memphis. That was kind of a head scratcher for me, why the Grizzlies traded him. Obviously, things worked out pretty well. Memphis added a center in the draft, but Houston got a very high-quality backup big man for extremely cheap. So that will be super helpful for them. One of the easiest ways to rack up wins in the NBA is having 48 minutes of good center play. Having Alperen Şengün and Steven Adams is just going to tremendously help Houston, not only offensively with Adams' screen setting, but also the ability to box out, clean up the glass defensively, and defensive possessions. The Rockets were a top 10 defense last year. They'll probably hover around the top 7 or 8 this year. I expect a really strong season for them. I think the chemistry between Adams and Amen Thompson is going to be really, really good as well. I think Amen Thompson can really utilize the screen setting from Steven Adams, and I also think Steven Adams' ability to box out, keep bigs off the glass, will lead to Amen Thompson snagging a ton of defensive rebounds, just like Russell Westbrook used to do in Oklahoma City. Then the Pelicans, another team that kind of in this playoff mix. If we look at the amount of Western Conference teams I have here, that's now 8. So this is kind of my 8 seed currently as I'm looking at it, but with the play-in, things can go a little different, right? But I think the Pelicans adding DeJounte Murray, hopefully we get Zion Williamson healthy. We'll see what happens with Brandon Ingram. The Pelicans are going to play faster. They don't really have a true starting center right now. We'll see if Yves Missi kind of assumes that role as the year goes on. But I think the Pelicans are going to shoot way more threes. I think they're going to play way faster. You're going to have a lineup of DeJounte Murray, CJ McCollum, Brandon Ingram, maybe Herb Jones and Zion Williamson. That's a really fun 5. You have Trey Murphy off the bench. This team is loaded with wings. They have a bunch of wings. They have guys who can rebound off the wing position as well. They just brought in Javonte Green. Not a huge addition, but someone who I think can play for them. Gives them a little bit of added depth into their roster and rotation. I really like where New Orleans is at. I do think that they are the 8th best team currently in the Western Conference. I'm not sure exactly what their upside, their ceiling is, but the style of which they play and the amount of speed they're going to be capable of playing with, I think is going to really shock some teams early in the season with just Zion's ability to play downhill, the amount of spacing around him, and the amount of up and down trips that they have each game, getting up and down the court playing just a little bit quicker. I think it's going to be really, really fun to watch New Orleans this upcoming season. And then when we have the Eastern Conference discussion here, so I've got 5 teams currently through the top 3 tiers. We're looking for 3 more playoff mixed teams. This is where I have the Cleveland Cavaliers. If we're kind of doing a ranking here, I would have them right behind Memphis probably. I think Cleveland, another team that's going to rack up a bunch of wins. Like I talked about, having skilled size, talented size is always huge for winning games in the NBA. Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, they're going to be producing wins a ton for Cleveland. I know people want to break up those two. I don't necessarily know if you just do it to do it. I think if there's a trade out there that makes a lot of sense, cough, New Orleans, then maybe it would make some sense for Cleveland to do something around Jarrett Allen, most specifically. But as of right now, I think Cleveland likes the combination of Donovan Mitchell, Jarrett Allen. I think that they want to keep the youth together in Darius Garland and Evan Mobley. And I can't really fault them for waiting things out, especially now that they got Donovan Mitchell to sign that extension. They're in a very good spot, in my opinion. And they're going to be in the play-in mix, or playoff mix, excuse me. And you never know. Last year they made the second round of the playoffs. I'm not necessarily sure I'd bet on that again. Orlando, another team that's definitely right in this playoff mix. The Magic are a playoff caliber team. They're going to be a top 5 defense in the NBA this upcoming season. My question is, are they good enough offensively to keep up with Indiana, to keep up with Philadelphia, to keep up with Milwaukee? That's going to be very, very challenging for them. For sure, we saw in the playoffs, at times Cleveland suffocated Orlando because of Orlando's lack of three-point shooting. The 3 games that they won in the playoffs, they made more threes than Cleveland did. That's really what it came down to for Orlando. Getting Kentavious Caldwell-Pope helps. Jett Howard probably playing more minutes this year helps as well. They've kind of figured out some of the things. They let go of some pieces in their backcourt, Markelle Fultz most specifically. I think the Magic will be a better team this upcoming season, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to win a playoff series. Now, I'm not completely betting against it. I don't think the Magic are a bad team. I just think this speaks to the strength of the Eastern Conference. I think the Cavs are really talented, really good. I think the Magic are really good as well. I think a very young team, but a very poised, well put together roster that defends and can push in transition and has some really good offensive talent, most specifically with their 2-star wings in Paulo Banchero, Franz Wagner. But that might not be good enough in the Eastern Conference now. Against Boston, against New York, against Indiana, against Philly, and against Milwaukee if they're healthy. Those are 5 teams that, in my opinion, right now are just a little bit better than Orlando. And a lot of it has to do with the very top-end talent. The Knicks have an MVP candidate-type player in Jalen Brunson. The Pacers have an All-NBA guy in Tyrese Halliburton. The Sixers have a former MVP in Joel Embiid. The Bucks have a two-time MVP in Giannis Antetokounmpo. This is not any hate or disrespect to Orlando. They're a great team, really well-built, very young. Maybe they're just a couple years away from really hitting their stride and winning multiple playoff series in a row. And then for other playoff mixed teams in the East, I think this is where you can safely, comfortably put Miami as well. They'll probably make the playoffs if I had to bet. I would be pretty surprised if they do not make the playoffs, just because they are a very talented team. Now we get into the play-in mix in the West. This is where the Sacramento Kings find themselves. This is where the Los Angeles Clippers find themselves. So now we're already up to 10 teams in the Western Conference. Kings fans, I really do like your team. I'm not exactly sure how DeMar DeRozan fits into the fold. I think he's a talented player. I think his synergy with Domantas Sabonis is going to be very, very good. Don't get me wrong. My question is, how does he function, though, when he's not a part of the primary action? How does he coexist with De'Aaron Fox when it's a Fox and Sabonis two-man game because of the three-point shooting? Now, I completely understand. Kings fans are probably already commenting, well, teams last year didn't guard Harrison Barnes. You're 100% right. Harrison Barnes was horrible last year. The question to me isn't about, is DeMar DeRozan better than Harrison Barnes? The question to me is, how much better does DeMar DeRozan make the Kings compared to Harrison Barnes? And even though he's a way better player than Harrison Barnes, I don't know if it moves the needle as much as it necessarily should. Now, maybe Kevin Huerter has a way better shooting season. And this is where maybe you could actually see the Kings jump up over New Orleans, which honestly I'm kind of talking myself into. Like, I don't even know. We're going to put the Kings up into the playoff mix. I've talked myself into it. I think DeMar DeRozan, even though I'm not like the biggest believer that he's the penultimate perfect fit there in Sacramento, I do think he makes them better. So I'm going to have 9 Western Conference teams in the playoff mix there in the West. The Clippers, I also have a play-in mix team. Depends on really Kawhi Leonard's health, James Harden's health. I don't think this team got that much worse losing Paul George. I know that's going to sound crazy to say. Yes, they were the 4 seed last year. I still think that if they're healthy, if Kawhi Leonard plays 65 games in the regular season like he did a year ago, and if James Harden plays 60, 70, maybe even 75 games in the regular season, I could see the Clippers being a playoff team as well. Like, it really comes down to the health on Kawhi Leonard, which is kind of like a broken record. We've been saying that for years and years and years about the LA Clippers. It just comes down to Kawhi's health. If he's healthy, he's one of the best players in the world, and the Clippers are a very legit team. I still think that their team is very well built. Ivica Zubac is going to have a huge year, and I do like their additions of Derrick Jones Jr. and Chris Dunn. I think those two guys really add a point of attack defensive element that the Clippers needed, and also some really necessary athleticism. Go back to last offseason, I was kind of optimistic about the KJ Martin addition for the Clippers. Now, KJ Martin was a much worse player than Derrick Jones Jr. I think Derrick Jones Jr.'s athleticism and his ability to play above the rim fits really well with James Harden offensively, and also gives them some necessary weak side shot blocking. Some above the rim play that they just did not have a year ago. In the play-in mix, we also have the Golden State Warriors. When you have Steph Curry, you have a chance. I like their Buddy Hield signing. I like Kyle Anderson for them quite a bit. I like DeAnthony Melton. They took some risks on guys. They got some mid-level players who have some real problems with them. Slow-Mo's got obviously the spacing concerns, and the speed that he plays sometimes is a negative, also sometimes a real positive, with getting defenses kind of off balance and playing just in a little bit of a different pace of play. Buddy Hield obviously is not a good defender, doesn't do much when he's not shooting the ball well. And then DeAnthony Melton's got some injury concerns here. So Golden State took a little bit of a risk. They lost Klay Thompson as well. So the Warriors are in an interesting spot, but I still think when you have Steph Curry, you're going to have a chance. So they're going to be in that play-in mix for me, as are the Phoenix Suns. And this shows kind of I really love doing this tier list because it shows the difference between the conferences. I'm very optimistic about the top 5 teams in the East, and I also think, teams 6 and 7 in the East are extremely good too when we look at like Orlando and Cleveland. Like, there's 7 teams that maybe could really make a push in the first round or second round of the playoffs, right? I think the West is where the really impressive part of the West is there's like 11 or 12 really, really good teams. Like, I think the East is probably a little bit better at the top. I do like Boston over everybody still. I think New York's right in that same tier nearly, and I think that the Pacers, Sixers, and Bucks like kind of stand above some of the other Western Conference teams. But when you get to the West, like, this is where the things are crazy. Like, if you're fighting for the 7 through 10 seed, there's like 6 teams in that range that could be pushing for those 4 spots. And that's what makes it really impressive. To me, I think that the Clippers, we talked about the Warriors, and for the Phoenix Suns, last year they were relatively healthy. Their team wasn't very good. Now, they did add Tyus Jones. They're going to be kind of in this ballpark again. They lucked in to the 6th seed. Now, one thing I'm going to say, without any good defenders on their team basically last year, Frank Vogel had them as a top 15 defense in the NBA. I think Mike Budenholzer is a good coach. I think he's going to win a lot of games probably. The question is, does he win enough games to topple over some of the other seeds? I just don't know. Kevin Durant's a year older. Devin Booker's a year older. Bradley Beal's a year older. Yusuf Nurkic is a year older. If they have any real bad injury luck, which I think is fairly likely to assume will happen, I could see the Phoenix Suns being a 10 seed, being an 11 seed even, and completely missing the play-in. That would be very interesting. And I know people are going to be mad about it. They're going to be upset saying, oh, this, that, or the other thing. Just count the Western Conference teams with me. 1 with Oklahoma City, 2 with Dallas, 3 with Minnesota, 4 with Denver. Then we have 5 with Memphis, 6 with the Lakers, 7 with the Rockets, 8 with the Kings, 9 with the Pelicans, 10 with the Clippers, 11 with Golden State, and 12 with the Phoenix Suns. There are 12 really good teams in the West. And I just think flat out, like, 2 of them are going to miss the play-in. That's just the reality of it. Could it be New Orleans? Maybe. Could it be Sacramento? Maybe. Could it be any of these teams here in this play-in mix? Probably. That's kind of where it seems like things are leading right now in the Western Conference. When we get to some of the bad teams, Atlanta's in this mix. They're just not very good. Their second best player is Jalen Johnson. They're just not great. Trae Young, he's got some real positives about his game. I think Trae Young's an underrated player at this point in time. They're just not good, though. The team is not very well built. And they're not in a really great spot to win a lot. When it comes to the teams that are in Cooper Flagg discussion, Brooklyn is definitely. Washington definitely is as well. Those are teams that are tanking. I think another team that is kind of in that Cooper Flagg discussion still is Charlotte. We'll see how their season goes. And you're going to notice that there's not like a lot of teams that are kind of in this bad tier. Chicago definitely is. Chicago probably doesn't really recognize itself as a true flat-out bottom of the East team. They're just bad. Okay, they're not good. They're going to be like the 13th seed in the East, probably, maybe 12th seed in the East, because there's some of these teams down here, like Brooklyn, Washington, Charlotte. Utah, I think, is bad. So Utah, this is funny. Utah kind of fits in both of these categories. Utah's bad, but they want Cooper Flagg, but they're not bad enough to get Cooper Flagg probably. So they're going to probably end up picking 8th overall in the 2025 draft. That's just how this thing seems like it's going to go. The Spurs are also in both of these tiers. The Spurs front office wants Cooper Flagg. Victor Wembanyama wants to win, so they're going to be in the bad tier because Victor Wembanyama is going to be an all-NBA caliber player. I could honestly see them maybe getting up to there just because Victor is that good. But ultimately, I think they're just going to be a bad team. I don't think they'll be in the play-in mix. The Pistons are a bad team as well. We'll see if a couple of their adjustments help them win more games. They added more shooting this offseason, Malik Beasley being one of those notable guys, Tobias Harris as well. The team got a little bit better. Not good enough to be in that play-in mix, in my opinion, but they got a little bit better. Portland wants Cooper Flagg. Portland is not good. Portland is a very bad team. And Toronto is bad as well. So this is kind of where my tier list kind of sits. A couple of these teams at the end, there's not a lot to say about them. Toronto's roster is kind of a little clunky. Detroit still is extremely young, and we just don't really know what they're going to be. I know last year they were absolutely horrid. I think they'll be better than they were last year. I think hopefully with Monty Williams being out, new coaching staff in, I just hope Detroit takes a step forward, which is what I'm expecting. I got 4 teams right now contending for Cooper Flagg. Brooklyn, Washington, Charlotte, and Portland. Now things can definitely shift and pivot. Like maybe Detroit does go down here. Maybe Charlotte bumps up there. But for the most part, I feel really good about this list. You're going to notice that there's a real absence of play-in caliber teams in the East, which is, again, part of the problem here with Brooklyn, Washington, Detroit, Charlotte, Chicago, Atlanta. Like Atlanta and Chicago probably end up here again like they were last year, just out of necessity. So that's just kind of how things are going to go in the Eastern Conference, I think. And just honestly, this is where I'm feeling for most of these teams in the NBA right now. Obviously, it looks semi-similar to last year. Obviously, a little bit more hope in teams like Philadelphia and Milwaukee, who were both first-round exits dealing with some injuries last year. The Knicks also did not make the conference finals. I have them as a likely conference finals team this year. Memphis should look a lot better again this season. I think the Lakers will look a little bit better. I think Houston takes a really big step forward. In fact, I kind of want to put Houston like here if I was ranking it left to right. It's an interesting group for sure. And obviously the West is such a unique bloodbath, especially from spots like 4 through 12. It's just such an interesting combination. And then the East 1 through 6 is such a battle as well. So interesting tier list. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Really appreciate you guys all watching. Let me know your rankings down in the comment section below, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.